That is big, right? Yeah, but you know, so if we're not providing.
Yeah, you have to, like,
Yeah. So we should get started.
Hey, were we muted or we live?
We're live and the recording has started again.
Perfect. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started since we're running a little behind schedule. So the next session is to tax or not to tax, the gray areas of ordinance and taxability. We've got our moderator here, Ron Benton, joining us from Big Mountain, and then we've got Kristin Drain from Big Sky, Misty Edwards representing Craig and Wolf Creek, and Lanie
Gospodarek.
Gospodarek.
And it's Lanie King.
So thanks so much. We'll go ahead and get started and turn it over to Mr. Ron.
Hey, good morning, and it's 10:31, so we're starting actually on pretty good time. Tammy asked me to be the moderator, and the way she described it was, we have three highly experienced people who know this topic really, really well. They're going to be exceptional doing that. They're also fun people, and so we need someone who's exactly the opposite. And boring. So that's my role here, is to ask a bunch of prescribed questions that you've had some input to as well. So thank you all for joining. And this is a very deeply experienced panel, so we're fortunate. I have some general questions for each of you, and we'll just kind of do them in order. They have seen the questions, so there are no gotchas here, but we charge extra for that. And so with that, let's start with Kristin. Can you tell us about yourself, how long you've been in the community, what's your role, how long you worked with Resort Pass?
Yes, so I moved to Big Sky in 2010, so been there about 15 years and worked for a bank before starting with the Big Sky Resort Area District in 2017. So I was the first full-time employee. It was a big deal at the time. We had a 3/4 time employee who was completely overwhelmed and maxed out. And the board finally decided to hire a full-time administrative officer, and so that was me. So it's been about 7.5 years now, and still doing it.
So Misty, same for you.
So I've been with Lewis and Clark County. Craig and Wolf Creek are governed by the county commission. I've been in county finance office as a deputy finance officer for a number of years. Craig passed their ordinance in 2014 and Wolf Creek in I got that backwards. Craig was 2010, Wolf Creek was 2014. They're both very small. So I manage both of them. And they both have advisory committees. They don't meet that often because the money's very specific in how it's used. And it's just part of my job.
Cool. Thank you. Emily?
So I'm Lanie Gospodarek and I work for the city of Whitefish. I'm relatively new there. I've only been there for 2.5 years, so I'm not as well versed on Whitefish. I did spend 21 years working for the town of West Yellowstone. So if I slip into the wrong municipality, that's why I'm gonna take a page from your book. And I love how you just, you say I've just been there for a number of years, so I've already revealed myself, so that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But anyway, but what I'm really experiencing now is just what it's like to work for a different community that administers their resort tax differently. I think it's easy to just do your thing in your community and really just forget about how all those communities are doing it. And what I'm learning is that there's more than one way to peel the apple. Absolutely.
And for our audience here and electronically, we have representatives of each of the three types of mechanisms that the state allows. So we have a resort area district. In Big Sky, we have resort areas that are overseen by the county. And then we also have a resort community representative. So if you know your code, Tammy's nodding her head saying, well, that's exactly why we did it this way. And it's really important because for those of you who are new into this process, if you're not an incorporated community, you will have this choice between resort area and resort area districts, and that's an important one. So next question, I'm going to bundle kind of sets of questions together so we can move forward. Kristin, tell us about the community you have, a little bit of demographics, a little bit about your tourist season, and then pop into the resort tax, 3%, 1%, I'll be a reminder, but go ahead and just jump in with us.
Yeah, so we have, I think, around 3,500 residents at this point, in Big Sky, and our tourist season is mostly winter, ski season, obviously. March is by far our biggest collection month, so that's our busiest month, I would say, for tourism. It's just kind of spring break after spring break, and the whole month is just extremely busy. July and August are fairly busy for us, with, people visiting Yellowstone and staying in Big Sky, as a result. So that's part of it, and then, yeah, what was the next part of it?
So you're unincorporated,
Yes.
and you have school districts and fire and sewer and all of the other stuff. It's my understanding that you really provide the infrastructure or that the payments towards that infrastructure through the resort area district taxes.
Right, yeah, we fund fire district, transportation, water and sewer, all of those parks and trails districts. We have, I don't know what the number is now, how many districts there are, but we have quite a few and we fund a lot of those. So that would be our property tax offset.
And you did describe this property tax offset. You don't do any direct millage reduction or perfect.
Right.
1%. What do you do with your 1%?
So our 1% was approved in 2020 for a water and sewer project. So we have a brand new water treatment facility that's up and running now. And then we also funded a pipeline that would take go from to our canyon area. But that is still a work in progress, I guess. It hasn't been deemed completely feasible yet. So right now we're in a place of we have a new project that was just approved on the ballot for workforce housing, and so kind of trying to figure out when we pay that one off and move on to the next one. That's where we're at with it right now.
Thank you. Your governing authority is your resort area district board. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we have a 5-member board that are elected, and so they meet monthly and sometimes more than once a month in the past 6 months. So we've had a lot of meetings, but they have 4-year terms, and yeah, they've been great board.
Great, thank you. Misty from Craig and Wolf Creek, tell us about those communities and who's in them and what the tourist season looks like there.
Sure. So Craig, I'll start with Craig. It's a very small community. I don't know if many of you have been through there. I've gotten off the interstate to go into Craig. There's approximately 35 year-round residents in Craig. Their tax is year-round. They have both the 3% and the 1%. Their governing body, as I said, is the county commission. Very tourist-driven economy from now until probably September, mainly fishing. They do get some off-season duck hunting, hunting on the river, sort of stuff. Wolf Creek is maybe a little bit bigger population-wise, 50 people, year-round residents. They're very small, so I'm like, I don't know if I'm appropriate for this panel. Because in addition to being very small, there just aren't a lot of businesses there. Again, very fly fishing driven, to guiding, that sort of stuff. Wolf Creek's resort tax is in effect from April to November, and they only have the 3%. Craig's mainly funds their wastewater system. A portion of it does go to the fire department. They were doing some operations, maintenance, and upgrades to their fire station. And that's wrapping up. So we'll probably be looking at amending that ordinance to reallocate those funds. And Wolf Creek's entirely goes. The way the ordinance is written is the first 50,000 in collections each year has to go to the wastewater system. And then anything above and beyond that, the advisory committee can make recommendations to allocate. But in the 11 years it's been in existence, they have never reached 50,000 in collections. So I don't have to worry about that. Yeah.
Yes, a resort area, the county makes those decisions. Does a ballot measure need to go to the residents of the community, or is that strictly done at a county level?
No, the ballot measure goes to the residents of the community.
Like the others?
Yep.
Okay. And how's your process of engagement? These are very small communities. They just come to the council and you have an advisory committee?
There's advisory committees in each one of the communities, because they're so small. I'm, very familiar with all the members. We meet in the spring just to kind of go over, if there's any new businesses, what their needs are. Wolf Creek is considering putting the 1% out to the voters. And just getting to know the residents and the business owners, so helpful. And it's really easy when it's, 35 people in a community.
Coming back to Kristin, same question about knowing your constituents and in their case also having an advisory committee. How does Big Sky approach that?
As far as business
Well,
outreach,
the just communicating with constituents and engaging them in what you're doing.
well, that's what Tammy does. Yeah, we have a lot of outreach as far as newsletters and, social media, things like that, to reach our businesses and our constituents and, trying to engage people to come to our board meetings, which feels like we have usually the same 10 people there, give or take, but, Tammy works really hard to engage the community.
Thank you. Lanie, all those same questions, but let me
Yeah.
read them out for you just.
I'm old.
Tell us about the community the great community of Whitefish. And some demographics, the tourist season, and when you started with your tax and amended it.
Okay, I think they started the tax in 1996. And they have the 3% only. They got too big for the 1%. I think this recent legislative session has made it so that they will be able to get that 1%. They probably will apply that for community, like for affordable housing, most likely. Let's see, what else am I at?
So, size of the community,
Oh, okay.
kids, schools.
Yep, so we're approaching 10,000. I think we're at about 9,000 people. The tourist season is mostly winter. It's very much like Big Sky in that it has the ski area that draws the people, although the ski area is not in this jurisdiction. We're also close to Glacier National Park. So in those capacities, we really are similar to Big Sky. The season, the break between the seasons is, I think, getting smaller. Which is, usually what you're hunting down is, having resort tax be applicable all year. Well, it is already applicable all year long, but the shoulder seasons are now contributing more to the collection of the resort tax. We have a committee, an advisory committee, some resort tax monitoring committee, and what their role is to determine what the money will be spent on, what the projects are. So we have just 3% now, but then there's, in our ballot language, it's very specific in terms of what the money can be spent on. So there's 48% that is public works, and 10%, which is parks and recreation, like trails and infrastructure. There's 2% specifically for the Whitefish trails, which is a trail system that is all around the outlying areas of town. And so people can bike and hike and run on these trails. And so they're a big part of, I think, the draw that people come and utilize, particularly in the summer. There's 5% for the administration, for the businesses, and it's a 25% property tax relief.
Okay, thank you. So we've used about a quarter of our time to do the general stuff. Now we're going to dive into the nitty gritty of what's to tax or not to tax. That is the question. That's been around for hundreds of years. And more important now, what falls through the cracks? And as Tammy's note said, you know, is the souvenir candle a necessity of life or is it a luxury? So let's start with, and remember, if you go deeply into the code, there's the discussion of luxuries versus necessities of life. And I've looked through almost all of the codes of all of you, your ballot measures, your ordinances, your resolutions, because that's how we stole and built ours. So let's start in order. Kristin, how does your community define what a luxury good is?
It's a good question. So, yeah, we do have a list in our ordinance of specific items, but we also have the helpful phrase of including but not limited to. So that gives us some flexibility as far as, you know, if there's an item that isn't listed in the ordinance, then we can make a determination. Is it a necessity? Is it a luxury? And so there's a lot of ways of looking at it, but I think sometimes it comes down to, you know, is it something, you know, as far as services, could you do this for yourself or do you need someone to do this for you? Can you cut your own hair? Or, you know, is that a necessity to have someone cut your hair? You know, that's something we don't tax as haircuts. So but I think there are still, you know, there's always things that come up that have never come up before, still to this day. So I think it's impossible to list everything in the ordinance, item by item. I know there are some jurisdictions that have quite a long list and I think that comes in handy sometimes, you know. You don't have to revise your ordinance every time a new item comes up, but do have to make determinations.
So Misty, same question for you, for your jurisdictions. How did you come up with luxury versus necessities of life?
I think the first thing that we did was decide that we weren't gonna really focus on the luxury, but more, is it a necessity of life? And as an example, the biggest one would be, we don't have a grocery store in either community, but we have a gas station, and the gas station really wanted to beef up their collections. Surprisingly, they wanted to tax everything. But obviously we're not gonna tax groceries. So we kind of broke it down for them, like, yes, the bread is a necessity and the peanut butter and the jelly to make the sandwich. So you wouldn't tax those because that's a necessity. But if you're gonna prepare the sandwich for them, that's not a necessity. That's a luxury to have somebody prepare the sandwich for them. And so we kind of took that route. Other than that, in those two communities, everything is a luxury. You don't need flies. You don't need fly fishing rods. I have several. It is something to me, but it's absolutely, you don't need it to live. Maybe mentally, for your mental health, you do. And so it's been really easy for the most part for us. We've had a few gray areas with short-term rentals, Airbnbs. Is a crib taxable? It was not part of the original rental. The owner is going to tax them or is going to charge them for it. So is it therefore taxable? And I'm trying to think that one I had to ask our county attorney for his legal opinion, and I'm pretty sure it was taxable.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Lanie, luxury goods versus necessities of life.
I think that it's a combination of both. I think that luxuries is where you start, or at least in my experience, just because that's the reason you're taxing in the first place. So, you know, the decision on, you know, like the services, you know, if you have your house cleaned, but you're not in the act of business, then the service of having your house cleaned is not taxable. So contracted services, I think, are not taxable for Whitefish, and I think that's Salesman as well. But if it's related to the tourism function, then it is. And so on that basis, you're determining on the basis of luxury. But necessity of life is the other part of the conversation, and that I think that where that comes up most recently is dispensaries, like medical necessity. And so, you know, your dispensary is probably doing a booming business, and you're like, boy, we're not getting much resort tax from them. It's because they have so much clientele that they've got the card, you know what I mean, that's determining that, so. Medical necessity really does kind of come into play, unprepared and unserved, you know, like just that particular phrase, makes it so that, it's easy to determine what at the grocery store, should be taxed versus, not taxed. But then after that, you know, like, determinations need to be made, you can't think of everything, and so, I think every entity is handling those, probably in a little bit differently, but I know that you can't change your ordinance every time there's a new determination made, and so, and who has the authority to make that decision, gets decided by the entity, like Whitefish right now, the city manager has the authority to determine that's taxable or that's not, when it becomes a particular question about a particular item. And then what we've been doing is just like keeping a document going of this determination about this item was made. And then we just actually, when we revised our resort tax ordinance most recently, she scooped up everything that had been determined between 2011 and present. That had not been incorporated into the language, so that all of the exemptions, all of the this is taxable, this is not taxable, got put in there, so that now it's in I would recommend doing that a little sooner. Like in like shorter period increments, just because it could be your policy now to tax this thing, but it hasn't been put out there, and so it's hard for you businesses to know what's taxable and what's not. The other mechanism for determining who's doing what is the audit, you know, and then the conversation about, I think now that short-term rentals have become a much bigger component of resort tax collections as opposed to lodging, other lodging types of lodging, where it's all rolled in one when it's a hotel, right? So the crib, everything, but that's all taxable at the end of the day. And short-term rentals are taxing in pieces, like the service fees, the cleaning fees, apparently the crib fee, you know, like whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like, and so, so there've been conversations about that.
Thank you. And for those of you who look through these ordinances, or you talk to your attorneys, they'll say either specify everything that's in, and then all others that's out, you know, generally out, or specify everything that's out. Or if you're really boring and nervous, you do both. So kind of a mix back and forth. Now, this will be some specific questions for each of you based upon interchanges that we've had. Kristin, what are the common gray areas that you encounter?
Yeah, I think back to services, those are the most gray areas that I encounter, I would say. Things like fitness classes and personal training is a kind of a controversial one in our community because like, oh, it's related to health. But if you're paying someone to train you, it feels like a luxury. So that's one that's been debated a lot, kind of a gray area, but we are taxing it now. Unless our board decides to change that, then we'll continue. I think, yeah, other services that are, you know, grocery delivery isn't something that's named in our ordinance, but things like that definitely feel like a luxury. I think that's where most of the gray areas come up for us is services that, you know, not everyone necessarily utilizes, but things like that are probably the biggest gray area.
Okay. Lanie, same question for you.
Darn, now I needed the extra time. No, that's right. I think that gray areas for Whitefish kind of surround the in and out of town piece. You know, so for example, you have an outfitter, their shop is in your town, but they take their clients outside and they fish or they do their outfitting in outlying areas. And so then it becomes a conversation where the transaction is taking place. And so that becomes a little nebulous in terms of, you know, where that transaction happened, particularly if the sports are being met out at, you know, like at the parking lot in the chamber instead of, because you don't have a a brick and mortar place, or out at the river, or the raft trip or the guide trip or whatever it is. That also kind of extends to purchases that are made from the brick and mortar place in the city limits, but then the item is delivered, like that was one of our most recent ones was the item getting delivered versus like an internet purchase. If you purchase something over the internet and it gets shipped out of town, then that person isn't taxed. But if you purchase something from the shop that's in town because you walked in and it's like an art gallery, that was the example, and everything was purchased. And then your business delivered it, then there was like the gray area of, well, if FedEx delivered it, well, that's a commercial carrier and that's like the internet, right? But if the shop delivered it with their stuff, like their van and theirs, then it was taxable. So it's pretty interesting hair splitting kind of event.
This is beginning to sound terrifying. So, Misty, how do you handle businesses that operate outside of traditional storefronts? Pop-ups, mobile, online.
So most of the mobile units that we have in those two communities, they have to be licensed by our health department. I'm thinking food trucks specifically, and our health department works with us to get in contact with them to explain the resort tax. So it's just a matter of education, I think, internally and with the business owner. We don't have a lot of pop-ups out there in those communities. They have like they have one event a year where they might get some pop-ups. And we have just made the decision that administratively, we don't tax them that one day that they're, if somebody comes out and sells bracelets, we're not gonna tax them that day. It's just education.
Kristin, that was also kind of a question you had for others. You want to embellish on what you'd like to know, any specific question you have for your colleagues here?
Yeah, I think just, we have a lot of vendors that, come in, they're based in Bozeman or somewhere else and come in and operate in our district, specifically for events, farmers markets, music in the mountains, the concert series we have in the summer, and it's really hard to reach them without the help of the event organizer, kind of obligating those vendors to come to us and register. And so, yeah, if you have any strategies that you're using here, how do you wrangle those people?
I think farmers markets, things like that are they're a great draw. I think communities like having them, people like having them in their communities. People who are visiting like to have farmers markets or versions of that. And that's a trick, like having an event organizer is really, that's your conduit. And that's a conversation that I think needs to be more developed in Whitefish. I think that the education piece is very much a part of that. I know that West Yellowstone employs a resort tax bond that goes with having starting a business or getting a business license or registration. And I think that the fact that it's something that gets paid back, like I think that for events or farmers markets and things like that, where you have like an event organizer, that's super helpful because the event organizer is not necessarily the one that's selling something. Often they are, they've got their own booth, but imparting on the participants that they have to remit that resort tax. And then they're like this third party, like you have to go through the conduit of the event organizer to get to them and to know if they showed up. Like, are they on the list of the ones that are coming? And are they gonna, like Whitefish has a farmer's market every Tuesday. And people love that, but the vendors don't always stay the same from week to week, and they don't always come every summer. And so it's hard to have any sort of mechanism in which to enforce the collection of that. And then all of a sudden, if they've only come to one of the farmers markets or a couple of them throughout the summer, and then they're gone, and you have no way to get to them. And so that's like just plain lost revenue. I do think that having a resort tax bond on an event level makes it so that there's a little more skin in the game for the event organizer. And, you know, and then they have, but I think on the education piece, one thing that Whitefish doesn't do, but I think that West Yellowstone does well is provides the forms, like, you know, give them to the event organizer, and then the event organizer is obligated to distribute those, the remittance and forms. Because I think that there's a lot of things that just get lost in translation with the event happening itself, you know, like it's a busy time setting up and, you know, getting everything ready for the public to attend it. And I think one of the things that gets lost in the shuffle is that information piece is, by the way, you have to remit this. What would be the most desirable is having it be remitted to the event organizer and then they come to you with all of it, right? That's a hard thing to make happen, but at least if each business is getting the form, they get the reminder with each event that this is required.
Thank you. Kristin, how have you revised your ordinances or materials in you know, as these loopholes and gray areas have come up? How do you do that? I think Lanie spoke that they, you know, took their 14 years of discretionary decisions and then built them back into the ordinance. How do you approach it?
Yeah, so the biggest revision we did was in 2019, I believe. And alcohol had actually become an issue because the way our ordinance read, you'd think all alcohol is taxed at a bar, at a store, anywhere. But the way it read was, it said something like buy the drink, I think. And so grocery stores and gas stations were interpreting that as they didn't need to tax, you know, a bottle of wine because that's more than one drink, or a 6-pack is more than one drink. So that was a lot of revenue that we weren't getting because they weren't taxing alcohol. Just bars were by the drink. And so we fixed that, just said all alcohol in 2019. And then at that same time, I believe, is when we added the SNAP clause. So to say food, if you can get it through SNAP, is not taxed. And that's our way of looking at it. You know, those are necessities. If it's not part of SNAP, then it's taxed. So it also means prepared food. But that was kind of an easier way of looking at it than trying to list out, you know, bread, you know, milk, whatever. So we input that, and then we did revise to include recreational marijuana when that became legal, so we could tax that as well.
Misty, how do you educate businesses? You've got these two diverse areas and people coming in and out, and seasonals and trucks. This is a broader question for everybody, but how do you approach that?
You know, because they're so small, I just take the time to go out to each community a couple times a year and introduce myself. And we have printed educational material that we hand out to business owners. We haven't had a lot of business owner turnover since the ordinances were adopted, but it's just meeting them in their place of business, going over things with them. And then just my door's always open to visit with them. A lot of phone calls asking what's taxable, what's not. And also, like I mentioned, working with the health department, because the majority of the businesses in those two communities have to be licensed by the health department. So educating their staff on what they need to do to help get the businesses set up really helps to keep, especially short-term rentals. It's really hard to track short-term rentals. So.
So going to drill in specifically on how do you help your collectors communicate their tax? So whether it's the food truck or the lodging or the bar or whomever, you're obviously educating them, saying here's how you participate. What actions do you take, if any, to help them explain to their customers about the tax? Start with Kristin.
Yeah, I think we just try to use the right language, collecting versus paying for the businesses is a big one for us. So you're collecting it. We have Tammy's created like a little graphic where the business collects, they remit, and then it goes back into the community. It's like a little circle that I think is a helpful, you know, demonstration of what they're doing and how they can explain it to their customers. And you know, we don't have a requirement that it's on someone's receipt, like you might not necessarily see it on a receipt. But I think that would be helpful. Some of them just build it in, and it's nice when you can see it, and then they can explain it if it comes up.
Same question.
Pretty much the same thing. I think just educating the business owners up front that they are collecting, and we're not taxing them. They're simply collecting the tax, helps them understand, and it can pass that knowledge onto their customers. Typically don't get a lot of pushback from customers, to my knowledge.
Yeah, for municipalities, we have, you know, the mechanism of voting. Oh, everyone votes, but when there's public hearings and it's part of the community discussion on a more community sort of level. But I think also we have business registration in Whitefish. And so we are using the business registration process, which includes the resort tax collection for communicating with the new businesses or the renewing businesses about this is what the resort tax is. So we have this relationship already that's occurring when it comes to setting up businesses or renewing business registration. The audit also provides some educational component for, you know, what is taxable and what is not. And then in terms of the collection, you know, like through the business registration, it's also, there's the collecting versus paying concept, but there's also the component of you as a business are retaining and at least in Whitefish, there's 5% that they get to retain. So you're collecting this money and you're earning a little teeny paycheck for doing this task. And you get to retain 5% of what it is you're collecting on behalf of the city. And so I think that their role being underscored is another way of communicating what we're doing.
Tammy, can we get your magic graph sent to, or diagram that Kristin explained, sent out to the distribution? But some of us need that desperately now. We have more questions that we can go through together, but I think if we open it up to the group here, we have 22 minutes left and probably 3 hours worth of questions. So let's start with directed questions, and then we can open it up to the floor and I'll kind of monitor that.
So it's my understanding that Big Sky has a partnership with short-term rental organizations like VRBO.
Yeah.
I guess you go to Misty, what do you have for a mechanism for identifying short-term rentals?
So again, we use our health department when they license the short-term rentals. They notify us that one's been licensed, and we start the process there. The majority of the short-term rentals in Craig in particular, but some in Wolf Creek, one of the local fly fishing shops manages those rentals, and so they know, they automatically just tack it on to the bill. And in fact, and they've taken this step without asking, because they're located in Craig and the point of sale is in Craig, they also manage short-term rentals that are outside the area boundaries. But they still charge that 3% because the point of sale occurred in Craig. So we do get some benefit from those rentals that are further down the Missouri River, but not necessarily in Craig.
Next question, please.
I was actually gonna just throw an additional, we actually at Red Lodge, we use a software program, costs us 10 or 11 grand a year. Where they go out and do screen scrapes of all the different sites and rentals and everything. So they've given us, it actually more than paid for itself, because here's a list of, you know, all the sites that we're seeing and their approximate rentals and stuff. And we're actually just in the process of switching to a newer company that's keeping up with the technology better. And part of the reason we're doing it is because it also has some integrated resort tax online receipt payment as directly as part of that. So I'm getting the name of the new one we're moving to, but we do that and find that very, very helpful.
For those of you who are online, that's Red Lodge responding back.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yep, question.
For Misty, we had a place up at Craig, and there's lots of outfitters and guides who may not reside there, but take clients there. Is that a challenge to keep track of
It
those folks?
absolutely is. That is the biggest challenge with Craig and Wolf Creek is outfitters that don't have a brick and mortar shop
Right,
in town and trying to get them to collect the tax.
that to me is a bigger challenge than the short-term rentals.
Absolutely.
How do you deal with it?
You know, the relationships formed with the ones that do have a brick and mortar. I'm not gonna say they're tattling per se, but just asking them, is there a consistent outfitter that's here? And could you let me know who it is? And, you know, I will contact
You reach
them.
out to them, and how do you verify that they charged X number of dollars and should have been paying tax, collecting tax on it?
I can't I mean, it's an honest system, right? On the honor system. That's how many clients, that's what they charged. It's very much on the.
That's probably a bigger factor for us in Fort Smith than
Yeah.
short-term rentals.
Are those folks required to have a business license of any sort? Because
No.
I know in the municipalities, they could be, when as soon as you get out of the municipality.
No, not in, I mean, you know, Craig and Wolf Creek are unincorporated. They have to have an outfitters and guides license, but, MOA, is that what it is that license them? They're not required to notify us that they have
There is a
permitted
board
somebody to be on the Missouri River. It's
Have you worked with the Board of Outfitters to try and figure out who those people are?
a little bit, yeah. It's a challenge. I have found working with the state or any of them to be a challenge, but.
Next question.
So Red Lodge is known for its nonprofit organizations. I think our community foundation is like 64 registered nonprofits, which is great for our community. How do you deal with, or do you deal with nonprofit organizations that then provide services that are essentially luxuries? So, you know, whether they're selling tickets to an event, or they're renting space, or they're doing something like that.
We haven't had any.
Yeah. So that was another thing that was added to our ordinance, in 2019 was the board decided they didn't want to be taxing nonprofits that were doing that. So one of our board members had the idea to say, nothing is taxable for nonprofits except for, unrelated business income, as defined by the IRS. So we refer them to that. And if they're reporting any unrelated business income, they are supposed to collect tax on that. But usually, I'm not the biggest fan of it, I would say. A lot of the nonprofits are smaller and we tell them that and then they're like, well, I don't know if I have unrelated business income. I'm not sure what that is. You know, it's a little, you know, it's definitely something that I think we might look at if we revise the ordinance again, but that's how we handle it now.
Yeah, Whitefish has got a number of nonprofits as well. This is kind of a topic I just barely touched on with our city manager, Dana Smith. So I'm still in the process of learning how they do that there, but the conversations that we've had so far are that they don't typically tax nonprofits. But the conversation has drifted towards when they are providing something that is in competition with another business that's not for profit for the same thing. That's tourist driven, then likely it would be taxed. Because not all nonprofits are, well, I'm gonna use the Grizzly Wolf Discovery Center in West Yellowstone as a good example, just because I'm more familiar with that, but they're a nonprofit. But they are totally tourist driven in terms of admissions to see the bears and the wolves and their riparian exhibit there. And so that's it's been decided for that community that those are taxable, unless that's changed.
No,
but-
absolutely, we treat everybody this, I don't care if they're nonprofit or not. Like, if they're doing a thing that one of my businesses could be doing, their tax. They have, like, if they're doing a special event, they have a special event bond of 1,500. I treat them exactly like I would treat anybody else,
How much is that bond? 1,500?
1,500.
And I think one way that's impacted us is we have a community center now, a nonprofit that does fitness classes, fitness memberships. They're not taxing theirs, but the other businesses, gyms are having to tax theirs, and it's already cheaper at the nonprofit, so it feels unfair, to the other businesses, and so that's one way it's impacted us.
Yeah, that's great. That's been one of our dilemmas is especially, we have some nonprofits that rent space. For example, we've got an Elks Club, and they sell alcohol. Their members come in and buy alcohol and pay for it. And, so should that be that, which we do, because if they go to the bar, they're gonna have to pay that same tax. Or if they rent the space for a wedding, now they're renting the space for a wedding and providing food and alcohol and doing all that kind of stuff.
So, question, please.
Just, it's sort of a question summary. You don't normally apply the tax on a nonprofit entity business. Okay, that's one. Two, the nonprofit is a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that it can take tax deductible donations. There's other nonprofits out there that are not 501c3. And then finally, I think you said, if a nonprofit sets up a booth and sells hamburgers on the 4th of July in, I'll call it competition with other businesses selling pizza, hamburgers and stuff, then that revenue is taxed under resort tax?
It's not if it's going directly back into their programming and their mission. It would have to be an unrelated line of business. Yeah,
But
it seems like it should be.
it's not like you're diverting revenue from other restaurants by doing this nonprofit sale of cheeseburgers, so you're losing resort tax on those sales, but not gaining nonprofit.
We have a really good, so it's kind of like, is that their core business or not? So like we have a facility in town that runs all, and they are a 501. But they rent out rooms. So when they rent out rooms, they charge resort tax on that. Now, just to throw a loop into it, we also have the buses of Yellowstone in town. Their primary source of income is for a $1,500 donation. They'll take you for riding the old 100-year-old buses and you can go up over Beartooth Pass. In that particular case, that is their 501(c)(3) activity. We don't tax that. Right, wrong, or indifferent. So it's kind of like Elks Club, open bar, charging you for that. If you rent our facilities, we charge you for that. That's not their normal course of business. That's not part of their charity work.
So to summarize your summary, sometimes. And
I think a key term here would be fundraising too, like if a fundraising. If you're selling your hamburgers and your hot dogs at the 4th of July parade or event, and you're like a school team or a church, whatever, like, and it's a fundraising event, that sometimes can be a term that's making the difference. So that's like activity.
Yeah, and I think that's part of our work. If it's a fundraising activity, it's not taxable.
Right.
And so I like your IRS line of business because that's what it works out in practicality. And the good news is, as it's been mentioned a couple times, in case somebody didn't pick up on it, this is said in the ordinance not the ballot language, which means it's a little easier to get modified.
Mm-hmm.
You do it with council and you have to do that every 5 years. Well, I guess ours is a self-imposed 5 year. But it is definitely an easier process to modify and change than having to go back to the voters.
Well,
So one more, and then we're gonna go online and see if I'm
sorry, where we're located, there's a religious organization that brings in people, houses them, that people pay for the lodging, and they also have very aggressive fishing guide service. They take these people on the river. My assumption was that because of a religious affiliation that they're tax exempt. I don't know if that's the case or not. If they're charging for the same services that the businesses are charging.
Well, I'd say that's not a necessity, first of all.
Yeah.
And so, and it's not an activity
It's a
that
luxury.
yeah, it's a luxury and it's not something that is, you know, driving probably the purpose of their organization, and it's like a byproduct, and it's competing with other businesses that are doing this, providing the same service and getting taxed.
Right.
That's getting taxed.
And it's taxed.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And we do specifically exclude Girl Scout cookies and lemonade stands. I think it's under 18, Tom, is that right? That's language change.
That's how it says. I think it says fundraising, I'm looking at it actually, it says fundraising for nonprofit organizations, including concessions, so I think that that's how.
And it's a fundraiser.
Yes, and no, we do not. Enforce the tax on people under the age of 6 selling lemonade on.
Come on.
We might have thought about it, it's not here.
Alan, please come back in a couple of years and tell us the outcome of the Supreme Court case on that specific. Good luck. Do we have any questions from online?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, then we'll go, whoops. Any more questions for people in the room? Because we have more on our list, but definitely your priority is more important. Please.
I just have one quick comment that I think is important with this conversation, is it's not the nonprofits paying the tax. They're once again collecting the tax. So when you're so worried about all these like legal obligations with nonprofits, it's not that. It's the people, they're still having a luxury item, and these nonprofits are collecting the tax. So remember that.
It's the only thing that we look at where it's who is paying it, it's nonprofit versus everything else is, it's about the item, you know, the good or the service.
Yeah, because the question comes up is the word exemption. Is a nonprofit exempt from collecting the tax?
On and on, because the nonprofit, so in theory, this would be the way to really look at it. The nonprofit shows up at the restaurant to buy lunch, that might actually be exempt. But if the nonprofit cooks lunch and sells it to people who are not tax exempt, they're collecting the tax from people who aren't tax exempt, so it should be taxed. It's kind of a.
Well, we have another example. Our hospital is building a cafeteria right now that they're getting to finish up. Resort tax or not resort tax. So the answer was, if they're selling meals to the public, that's taxable. If they are providing shift meals, that's taxable, but you only pay it on the amount that they only collect it. On the amount that you collect. So if it's normally a $10 meal and your shift privileges are it's a $5 meal, you collect resort tax on $5, not on 10. If they prepare a room and it goes off to somebody in their hospital room, no resort tax. So it's whether their POS system or something. Somebody's already paying $600 for that hot dog. They don't need to pay resort tax.
I think all the ordinances are online on our website too, just for.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I think you have collected them all for anybody who wants to look at and compare.
Yeah.
And if you're one and haven't got it, get it to them, so that we have it to
Yeah.
copy.
I'll share the website with you and you can see where they are.
Please, Kim.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, you're in the process and you have nonprofits in your area or district or community. Whatever draft you start with on your ordinance, you will modify based upon the public comment that you get, and that will be valuable. So a couple last questions, and this it comes from you, actually. How do you handle the attitude of locals who believe that they aren't getting benefit from the tax that they have to pay into? Or because it's a tourist tax, but yet they're involved in that too. How do you explain that? But look first at Misty and then Lanie, because Kristin, this is one of your questions.
I think we just explain it that, you know, they're seeing a reduction in their sewer bills. And without that resort tax collection, their sewer bills would probably be double what they are. That's the ultimate driver that helps people understand it.
I think that in, like Whitefish, the, property tax relief is pretty hefty, so anyone who's a property tax owner. That's the first go-to is you're getting an enormous amount of benefit, probably likely way more in dollar value than you're actually paying out every time you go shopping in your town. But also, I think that most resort communities, once you get it, I'm not aware of a community or a district or an area that had it and said, nah, we don't want this anymore. I think that it's just, the evidence of the benefits, to the residents for the improvements in whether it's a service or, infrastructure, is great, and that it's coming on the heels of collecting it from people who don't live there. But have the benefit of, additional law enforcement that wouldn't ordinarily be there maybe 24/7, is now there 24/7, or, definitely in terms of sewer and water. And all of those services that come along with, collecting the tax, all of the infrastructure that's nice to use. And in the case of Whitefish, like their parks and rec facilities are extensive, and that means all of the residents get to benefit from that as well. And I think that when you point out the level of service that they have been able to achieve and then take advantage of as citizens, it's usually a good way to go about that.
To kind of a general statement, this came from Lanie for the rest of you. We all overlap in this domain. Are there opportunities to collaborate and share information back and forth? So especially when you're nearby, so Columbia Falls, Whitefish, Big Mountain, Polson, that you have, if you start talking about taxing the same things and not taxing the other thing, are there opportunities for collaboration beyond this meeting where we should talk about that? Or are you happy with where you're at?
There's always room for collaboration.
And I think my question too was really specific to, are there things where we can be consistent across the districts and areas and the communities where we all tax that, or we all don't tax that?
Yes.
And so that, as people move through the state from community to community, they're experiencing the same answer. And my example was, I talked to someone in Big Sky about mountain hot tubs. And so mountain hot tubs, they were like, well, Big Sky doesn't make us collect that. And I'm like, have they determined that that's a medical necessity? Because we have determined that it's not, but it's part of the building process as far as you guys are concerned. And mountain hot tubs deals with both communities. And so it was just like, I think that they felt like they were a little bit in the middle on that. And I thought it could be easier maybe if we decided together on that kind of thing.
And there may be some common language for nonprofits as well to consider the folks in the future. One more question and we've got 1 more minute.
Do any of the communities right here, do you guys have gun shops in town? Is Whitefish a gun shop?
We do. And I believe guns and ammunition are specifically not taxed. And I believe that, I don't know if that's per our ordinance or if that was the state law that dictated that, but I know we don't.
But other items sold in that business, like clothes and.
Yeah, that's the other item is half bucks. That's a little joke everybody else laughing, like, where do you go get ammunition in this county? Yeah.
Any other response?
No gun shops.
No, we don't have any gunshots, but I'm wondering if it's not federally regulated.
Oh, I think it's state, it's one of those things in the list of things you can and do and don't.
Right,
It's one of those things you're not allowed to mess with it, municipality.
like gas, you can't tax gas.
Gaming,
Yeah,
Slot machine,
casinos, you
yeah.
can't tax, it's very specific.
So we're
It did come up in our community. Guy came in, we never had a gun shop particularly exactly, too small a community to really afford the overhead. Being a firearms dealer. But this family came in and set up one. And our issue was initially we had reviewed that part of the statute which exempts firearms and ammunition. So we told him he had to pay tax on everything, and he's pointed to the state law and tried to say he didn't owe taxes on anything he sold. We said, no. The firearms and ammunition are exempt, but the services that you provide in terms of gunsmithing, taxable. The bear spray you sell, it's taxable in my store, it's taxable in your store. So it did come up. If it's taxable in anybody's store, it's taxable in their store. But firearms specifically and ammunition exempted by state statute.
So we're at time, but I do have a specific question for Lanie. When I or my family or friends drive through St. Regis, we stop and get a blueberry or huckleberry milkshake. If that's a thing for
Yes.
the rest of you, it's kind of
Yes.
required.
Yeah.
And they charge a resort tax because they're a resort area. That business also operates a shop in Whitefish, and this summer they are going to begin to sell the necessity of life of huckleberries. And you promise me that that will not be bad. Go back in the menu order.
I'm really sorry for you.
Your hair on site would be something.
I'm also sorry for my waistline, because I'm gonna go try one.
Thank each and one of you for taking time with us today.
Thanks so much.
Share my screen, just to see, this is the Resort Tax Association website. And if you click on the communities, it will take you to each of the communities where the ordinances are listed out. Below the map, like just to go to,
Yeah.
on the tab down here are the ordinances, resolutions, important information, so it's kind of all collected in one place.
Cool.
And that's mtresorttax.org.
Thanks for that, Tammy. So I think we've got 30 minutes and then we'll reconvene for a lunch and learn establishing resort tax. We'll have Ron with Big Mountain run us through what happened up there, the northern part of the state, and then Shane Grube over the Hefkin Basin Resort Area District. Yeah. So we've got a little bit of a break here. Feel free to mingle and then we have 1 minute here.